Okay, I think we're ready to start the meeting. Welcome everybody to those of you who are here in person and those of you that are online. This is our first hybrid meeting of this group. So I'm Eric Jensen. I'm with Jensen Strategies. I'm the facilitator for the group. And I'll just kick things off here quickly. Um, so the uh, the agenda for today's meeting, which was the slide before, there we go. So today the focus is going to be primarily on prevention, talking about prevention, vessel turn-in program, insurance, education, and outreach. And then we'll also talk a little bit more about disposal. So Josh is going to do short presentations on each of those topics, and then we'll have a lot of time for discussion with the group. Few points of order here. We have someone who is joining us who normally hasn't been here, but would you like to introduce yourself?
Blake Howell, we're going to be talking about insurance.
Thank you, Blake. So we have another resource in the room, and we were just joined by.
Hi, I'm Bill Ryan. I'm actually the deputy director here at DSL. I was just the last 3 months on a stint as the acting director of the Department of Agriculture. So I'm getting this fresh. So thanks for having me and thanks for being here.
Great, welcome. All right, I'm going to go over this again, but we're going to do things since this is an in-person meeting in part for those of you that are here. If you wouldn't mind silencing your phones. Also, in terms of how we are going to ask people to be recognized to talk, the online folks will continue to raise their hand to talk online, but we wanted to save you the trouble for those of you who are in person from having to be like this for 5 minutes. So what we would ask you to do is take your name tent, turn it up on end, and then I'll know that you're in the queue to be able to comment. So, all right. The next slide. Yes, and Kate did a great demonstration. Speak into the microphone if you would.
Yeah, I actually was going to mention, make sure to turn on your mic when you speak so that the folks online can hear you, because we just heard they couldn't hear you, Blake.
My apologies.
We won't make you do that over again. Okay. So, and on the next slide, we have contact information for Josh and Kate and myself, which you've seen and you have on your list. And then the next slide, we have the member participation. We just got into this. Again, those of you online, raise your hand virtually and you'll get called on in the order that your hand goes up, in addition to in the order of the name tents that go up. I will make an exception to the rule for DSL staff because if DSL staff puts a name tent up, I'm assuming that they are wanting to ask you a follow-up question, or they may have some clarification to be able to provide at that point in time. Okay, and with that, community involvement. There we go. I'm not seeing anybody in the audience here. There may be some folks in the audience online. The discussions during the work group meeting are going to be limited to the work group members and DSL staff. But we will have a period at the end of the meeting for community input, and we'll give some more instruction on how to do that at the end. Just reminding folks or letting folks know, if you haven't been part of this process before, that DSL is going to be having an open comment period on the proposed ADV program framework prior to bringing these efforts before the land board for a decision. And all of the meeting materials Information meeting materials are posted on the DSL website for these meetings if anybody wants to go back and see some of the materials. Kate, did you have something I didn't? Okay, thanks. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh, who's going to talk a little bit about schedule and updates.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. First, some schedule and program updates that I would like to share. Too loud for that to be that close. So you'll see the schedule for the next 5 meetings on the screen. The next 3 will be virtual. But we might hold another hybrid meeting in March or April if there appears to be a need and a desire. My plan for the next meeting is to talk about long-term funding, not only about potential sources, but also the long-term funding need and how those are to be identified. When we come back to meet on January 9th, it will be the work group's opportunity to review and provide comments on the draft program framework proposal that we're working on now, and these conversations are informing. And that's going to reflect the challenges identified by this group, and also the solutions that we have been and will continue to discuss. I'm committed to getting that to this group by January 4th at the absolute latest, so that you'll have some time to review, what, in my mind, the culmination of these conversations have led to, and then you can review that, and then we'll talk about those on the 9th. Since the proposal is going to certainly identify areas where legislative action will be needed, we're going to start diving into the weeds on legislative solutions at that January 23rd meeting. I don't have a final agenda for those last 2 planned meetings in March and April. We'll see where the needs are at that time, and then my plan is we'll plan accordingly. A couple of quick internal DSL announcements before we go on. First of all, we're happy to have Dorothy Deal from the Marine Board is going to be joining the DSL ADV team, actually starting next week. As many of you know, Dorothy brings a lot of experience working on this issue from the Marine Board. So we're really fortunate that she's willing to come bring that perspective to DSL as we look to tackle this issue on a large scale, kind of with a comprehensive effort. Also, Kevin McAfee, formerly with the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, is going to be joining us in January as an outreach and compliance specialist, also supporting the ADV work here. Kevin obviously brings a ton of experience working on this issue, especially on the social side of it. So I'm thrilled that he's also going to be part of our team. So perfect. Thank you, Kate. So prevention and the various methods that we employ to achieve it. Obviously, this is a big, very, very multifaceted conversation. So that's why I've dedicated, as you saw on the agenda, most of today's meeting to this broad topic of prevention. I've broken it down into those 3 subtopics, but I'm also happy to entertain any other ideas that may prevent the state or other jurisdictions for having to deal with ADVs. So starting with what we heard from stakeholders this summer on this topic, to summarize it, we've heard a lot. So regarding a vessel turn-in program, we heard, okay, so sorry, Kate. We heard a strong desire for a statewide vessel turn-in program as a way to eliminate boats from the cycle before they reach that ADV status. There were some thoughts on how that might be implemented and who such a program might be available to. There was also some obstacles to such a program identified. Legal ownership, boats without trailers, those things were identified, and I think we'll talk through some of those today. But I think it's safe to say that some sort of vessel turn-in program was something that everyone or nearly everyone supported in some capacity. Regarding education and outreach, we heard a lot about the variety of channels that need to be plugged into to spread information about the state's program, current government connections with boat owners, print and digital media, other creative ways of reaching people were all identified. And then regarding insurance, there was a desire among many folks for some kind of mandatory insurance requirement for at least a subset of boats. However, it was pointed out that insurance requirements, when not able to be afforded or met, can actually accelerate the transition of a boat to an ADV. There was support for insurance requirements for larger and or older vessels, but it was also brought up that there are often many legal nuances that get in the way of this otherwise elegant solution. And there was also some questions on the availability of insurance products that were in the private sector that were being proposed. So with all that in mind, my questions for the group on these three topics include the following, but are certainly not limited to these. So regarding the vessel turn-in program, again, seems to be broad support for it. I certainly, it's something that DSL supports as well. A question that I'd like the group to consider would be, how much money, how much resources should be dedicated to a vessel turn-in program? Also, what are the sideboards for that program in terms of eligibility? Is it open to all? Is it open to some? Is it open to business owners? Is it, question. I'd like to hear some conversation about who such a program should be eligible to. And I would encourage you all to keep in mind that the more sideboards that there are on such a program, the more administrative tasks there would be internally to administer such a thing, right? I mean, I know someone suggested income requirements. That could be a great idea. Also understand that then introduces some internal work. And then also with the vessel turn-in program, how do you actually gauge the true effectiveness of such a program? I'm interested in thoughts on that. Truly, I don't have the answer there. So for education and outreach, the first and foremost question that I have is what is the actual message and who is the audience that we're trying to reach? Are we trying to connect folks with available resources, or are we trying to encourage responsible practices? I also wonder how much of education could take the form of active assistance, completing steps for someone to get rid of an unwanted vessel versus just telling folks how to do it. So that's what I was trying to get at with that question. And then regarding insurance, for what, for who, and along with that, what would compliance, monitoring, enforcement, and ultimately subsequent consequences for lack of satisfying some requirement actually look like? Many people have agreed that insurance has a role to play in getting our hands around this issue, but what does that actually look like? So I've heard some strong opinions on that from this group, and I expect today we'll talk a lot about that. And then just to take a step back and just prevention efforts, whatever form they take generally, again, how do we measure success of preventing, something? I mean, part of justifying the need for this program now and going forward will be showing the results of the actions that we take. And then I'm also interested in any other opportunities that there may be for us to plug into community-based initiatives or things at the local level to support a statewide prevention program with these and maybe other elements. So I know I just put a whole lot out there, and just for the purpose of trying to keep the conversation into segments. I know Eric has the vessel turn-in program questions on the notepad, and we'll put them in the chat, and then I'd like to hear a conversation about that. So Eric, back to you.
Josh? All right. This was, we're going back to old school here with the chart pack for those of you that are in the room. And then the questions are going to be posted up on the chat, as Josh mentioned, for those of you who are online. But we wanted to be able to tackle these questions. I'm going to move this back just a little bit, and hopefully you can read them. So I'm going to tackle these questions in groups. And what I'd like to go through sequentially here. And it's going to be easy to kind of jump into some of the other areas that Josh listed, and just know that those are coming in the discussion. And we've got roughly an hour allocated to this, so we've got some time. Okay, so the first thing I would like to do is just point to the first question up here. Can everybody read this from back there? Good, your eyesight's better than mine. All right. So the first question that Josh had with regard to the vessel turn-in program is how much money should be dedicated to a VTIP? Any initial thoughts about that? And remember, before you speak, please introduce yourself for those who are online who may not be able to read your name tag. And for those of you online, please introduce yourself as well. For those who may not be able to see your name up there on the screen. So with that.
Sideways.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Stan Tonneson, owner of Rocky Point Marine and Boatyard and a board member of WOO. I was hoping Stephanie would have put her tag up first and tell us what the last turn-in program expensed. I think it was in the $300,000 range, but correct me. And I know that the state of Washington initially had a $200,000 cap on it. 3 years ago, they eliminated that cap, and I don't know what the cap is now, but it's quite a bit more. I would throw out a number of $1 million and see how that works for recreational vessels.
Okay, so $1
per year.
million in your mind would be a good
just
starting
throw
point
out
on
a
that.
number, knowing that yours is 300 for a partial, and it's just getting traction. And the state of Washington realized it's a good program. Let's take the cap off.
So what you're saying is with $1 million, that's kind of a primer, if you will.
Yeah.
So that when the program gets going and does well, it can you can move that. You can move that up.
Move that cat. Yeah, that is it's movable.
Right. Okay.
Starting point.
Great. And in response to your comment, Stephanie has put her name tag up.
My name is Stephanie Rawson. I'm with Metro's Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Department. Metro, in collaboration with Oregon State Marine Board and Multnomah County Sheriff's Office River Patrol, put together a boat turn-in program using some state funding, one-time funding. We set aside $350,000 for that program. The application period closed November 1st. So we set aside again $350,000. We've collected and disposed of 101 boats at this point. We still have about 40 to 50 applications that are still pending. We spent over 230,000 so far. So it's averaging to be about $2,300 per vessel. And these are recreational vessels. We structured this program. It was a short time frame to put up a program, so we really try to do something very simple. So the criteria was it couldn't be a business; it had to be an individual that owned the boats. Just because the reason we went for individuals is that through our program, we deal with dumped and abandoned items. We would have a lot of, there were more recreational vessels. We worked with different state programs dealing with larger ones. So we would often get calls, and I know Oregon State Marine Board would be like, I have this boat. How do I get rid of it? What do we do? Disposal resources and locations were limited. So we targeted that group to get some data on that. We recognize through this, we had a lot of marinas that could use some assistance, but the way that we designed this didn't really support marinas. So I just wanted to put that out there that marinas, I think, have an area that they could use some support. And I know they deal primarily, my assumption is, with recreational, but there could be other sources there. So again, it was about, it's about 2,300 per vessel. And some of this, we had a hardship versus as an express. And the difference was I had a boat, but I couldn't transport it. So we, under certain conditions, we would say, okay, Kate has a boat, she can't transport it. Based on the circumstances, we would pay for the transportation from the water, from their residence, wherever it was, to get to the disposal location. The express was Kate in this situation could actually transport her boat to the designated disposal location. So there was different elements that would increase or reduce the costs of that.
But on average, you were looking at about 2,300.
Correct.
Which is good information to have from experience. Online, we have Troy Wood.
Good morning. Troy Wood from Washington Department of Natural Resources and the Derelict Vessel Removal Program. So talking about price, I would have to say we started out with a $200,000 cap, and that afforded us the ability to remove just a few vessels per biennium. So we usually ran out of funds between month 10 and month 12. So we didn't have a program for the second half of that biennium. So we convinced the legislature to take the cap off. Now we're allowed to spend up to our budgetary limit on the vessel turn-in program, which is not realistic. However, it does allow us the ability to spend either 300,000 a biennium, or like we did last biennium, 1.2 million. So if we had just the 200,000, we removed on average between 20 to 30 vessels before we ran out of funds. Now, last biennium, we removed, I think it was 171 vessels. So some of those were quite large. They were 45-foot vessels, fishing vessels and stuff like that. So it kind of raises the average cost per vessel up a little bit. But we got them all out of the water, and that was the important thing. Thank you.
Troy, if I heard you correctly, and I know that Josh is going to have a follow-up here, but if I heard you correctly, you started off at a certain threshold, but as the program progressed, you were able to move up in terms of the allocation once the program really started working. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yes, we started out at a lower dollar amount, but we went back to the legislature with evidence that we could do more with a little bit more money. And so they agreed to that. And the program had shown that it wasn't being abused by any particular subgroup that were looking to dispose of vessels and stuff like that. So because of that, they said, okay, we'll just take the cap off.
Yeah, which goes back to Stan's original point with regard to kind of setting a threshold and then being able to move up. Josh?
Yeah, thank you. Troy, for Washington's program, well, so Stephanie was talking about the Metro program and how there was her agency could be more involved depending on the situation of a certain individual or a certain boat. Are there situations with your turn-in program where you'd be more involved with getting a boat out and ultimately disposed of versus other situations where in many cases you're just kind of footing the bill?
Oh yeah, so that's a great question. And what I'll have to tell you is every vessel comes with its own drama, its own situation, its own conditions. And so every single vessel is a different, unique set of problems to solve. So some of the problems that we've had in the past are floating vessels in marinas where the owners have gone into a healthcare facility and they really don't have any ability to deal with the vessel, and no one has the legal right to do anything other than the person who's in the hospital or medical facility. And so we really have to work with family members and stuff like that in order to get those vessels out of there, stuff like that. We tend to look at vessels that are on trailers that are easily movable as high priority as well, because they could just dump the vessel at the nearest fishing boat launch and then go sell the trailer. And that's why we also include the trailers in some of those things. So we'll take the boat and the trailer if it's on land, just to prevent them from dumping it at the nearest boat launch. So the boats that are in yards with flowers and stuff like that in them, that's a low priority. So we would go with on water, obviously, and then on trailers.
Okay, yeah. So that's getting into the second question we had here. But I want to make sure with regard to the first question, Aaron, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't make it over there today. I just had too many meetings. I wanted to raise
If you could
the
introduce
point.
yourself, Aaron.
Yep, I'm sorry. Aaron Bretz, the Director of Operations of the Port of Newport. I wanted to point out on the when we're talking about vessels and we're talking either recreational or commercial, I would recommend that we, I mean, a vessel that is abandoned, the activities that they're engaged in is how you determine whether they're commercial or whether they're recreational. But a vessel that's abandoned or derelict is neither commercial nor recreational. And so in quantifying all this stuff, I think that we should stick to a tonnage instead of going by numbers of vessels that we're disposing of. And this is all related to answering the question, because to me, to throw a number out there at this juncture without identifying a goal for the program over the course of several years is both hard to explain to legislators and the public, and it can have a tendency to wind up creeping out into other areas that we don't necessarily intend. So I think that the important part of this is quantifying what we have and then determining how many tons of vessels we want to dispose of, or what we're looking to do in the next couple or 5, 10 years, whatever the lifespan of the program would be in the near term and the long term, and then determine how much we're trying to throw at it. Because ultimately, I think what we would want to do is make it just enough to incentivize people to do the right thing, but not so much that it increases all of a sudden. You know, if we're talking about getting rid of boats that are sitting in people's yards that they're using for flower beds as it is, we got to prioritize it somehow. So I wouldn't recommend that we throw numbers out there at this point until we identify the rest of those pieces of that as far as goals go and purpose.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. And just for my point of clarification, when you're talking about tonnage and size of boat and so forth, you are not talking about actively abandoned and derelict vessels. We're talking about those that are headed that direction. Is that correct?
No, I'm talking about as a way of determining. You have to quantify everything. And the easiest way to do that, instead of saying, oh, because if you listen to the conversation, people have pointed out numbers of boats. We got rid of certain number of boats last year or whatever. That doesn't really mean that much in the maritime world. When you're talking boats, you could get rid of 5 16-foot boats and think that's a big number. Well, you compare it to 150-foot vessel that you had to dispose of, it kind of makes those 5 16-foot vessels, puts it into perspective. So, and they don't have to be in the water or actively being used for you to estimate the tonnage of the vessel. I mean, we're talking about put it into a garbage can at some point anyway, and that's all done by weight as well. And so I think the best way for us to measure all this stuff would be by tonnage.
All right, so I just want to make a point of clarification here, and I appreciate DSL staff's clarification as well. My understanding is with the vehicle turn-in program, you're really trying to target those that are headed toward being abandoned or derelict, and trying to take preventative action before they get there. Is that correct?
Is that question from? Okay.
I'll take it for you, Aaron. Thanks. I think yes, but not necessarily limited to that. I mean, in the situations that he is referring to, when boats are, for many intents and purposes, are now meeting that abandoned and derelict status. A vessel turn-in program, at least the way that I'm thinking of it, does not necessarily preclude those situations. It is in many ways geared towards getting them at that step before ADV status. But it doesn't necessarily need to not address the situations that he brought up, or the situations that certainly exist in many ports and marinas.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page and that understanding. Kate? Speak into the mic, please. Thanks.
Just wanted to relay that Travis Williams and Mark Lando agreed with Aaron Brett's sentiments that he just shared.
Okay. Thank you. All right, I believe you were next.
Eric Hunter, Diversified Marine. Thank you, Josh, for answering. The turn-in program is pre-vessel abandonment. Most is that exactly what we're hearing?
For certainly the legal definition of abandoned and derelict, yes, this would be kind of before it meets the level of where it could be seized by the government or another enforcement agency, taken out. This would be an owner, and an owner in this case could be a marina that takes rightful ownership of a boat that's been left to them, but addressing it before it's at that absolute last state of affairs.
Thank you. And my second point is that I heard Aaron, and I understand tonnage. There's light ship tonnage. There's all sorts of tonnage terms, and I deal with that every day of my work. I would like to have people understand that there may be a closer scale to be looked at, and that is the cubic feet of waste or cubic yards of waste that an object has. A 15-foot vessel could be 1 ton and yet could contain cubic mass that is greater than that scale. I do not look at vessels in terms of tonnage when I do estimating for dismantling and destruction. I look at the cubic mass, because that is the weight by which I then put into a 20-yard box that I then send to Metro, that I get charged for, and that I then repeat back up the chain as to what it was. So I don't, the word tonnage isn't used in terms of disposal and destruction, except for when I'm selling scrap steel.
Got it. That's a great clarification on that point. Thank you for doing that. And I believe, Mike, you were next.
Mike Dunning, Port Coos Bay. Yeah, kind of in line with what Aaron said. I mean, I think these questions up here, in my opinion, should be a little inverted. We need to understand number 2 and number 3 before we talk about number 1. To me, I think our priority is the vessels that are in the water, and I want to be really careful of. And I think, again, Aaron alluded to it, that we're taking care of vessels in people's yard that they don't want to deal with anymore, that have the means to get rid of it, but they don't want to pay to get rid of it. And we're going to be overcome with that. To me, the priority is the vessels in the water. And that should be our number 1 priority. Again, I want to be very careful of, just open that. I know Washington's had this for a while, but I think we're opening a can of worms. I mean, you start going down that road, is what's next? Cars? Are we gonna, people dump cars in the woods all the time. That's an issue. We're just taking people's garbage for them. So.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Chris?
Yeah, Chris Hathaway or Columbia Estuary Partnership. A couple thoughts, I guess. One, I mean, whatever the amount of money is that is dedicated to a vessel turning program, I mean, ultimately the report back to the legislature is going to be boats, tonnage, size of boats, all that is going to be captured. It doesn't really matter in some respects, because when it's reported back, you don't want to report on all those. And then I guess a question for Stephanie and maybe for Troy would be is there any cost share with these programs? The existing vessel turning programs, is that something that's part of the program, or is it just like I bring in my boat and it's like all paid for? Easy peasy.
Stephanie with this is Stephanie with Metro's Waste Prevention Environmental Services Department. The question was there a cost share for Metro's turn-in program? In this case, no. We were trying to go for the low-hanging fruit of who are owners of boats who are having difficulty getting that. There's a lot more criteria we could have put on. We could have been a little bit more stringent, but we had a short period of time to utilize those funds. And as a program that deals with dumped and abandoned debris, boats being one of them, there was kind of a theme we were seeing. So we were trying to address that in the most quickly and efficient way. Looking at people's financial records is a pretty heavy lift, and it wouldn't be a swift sort of motion. And for us, we had a lot of applications for dumped and abandoned boats that were neglected in the water or tied to a tree somewhere. We had a different means to manage those. I would say that doing a cost share, depending on what the goals and outcomes were, what are certain things you're trying to avoid or not spend money on, could be a benefit on that. But again, we didn't want to get involved in a reimbursement. We had the funds. We wanted to act quickly and get as much as we can so we could get some data and share out what we did and all the other opportunities to either tighten things or include more folks.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Stephanie, for answering that question. And so, we've naturally moved in and went into the second question. And I feel like folks have been addressing it along the way. But let me just kind of recap a few things that I think I've heard so far. One is with regard to the question number 1 is probably the best way to make a decision about how much money should be dedicated is to put enough money in it for it to be effectual, but not so much that it that having not been tested yet, that it may look like too much, if you will. So enough that you can basically run a pilot project, for a lack of a better term, and then be able to use that to launch for additional money, assuming that the program is effective. With regard to the sideboards, what I've heard, one is with regard to weight, but the vessels that are currently in the water are ones that would definitely be on the priority list, which is consistent with other discussions that we've had in this group. The question about whether or not, where do you draw the line on the vessel training program in terms of what vessels qualify for that? I don't know if we've gotten clarity on that. And Josh, would you like us to go down that direction?
Oh, absolutely. If the group would like to offer anything, I was going to ask a question to you, Stephanie. Sorry. As you implemented Metro's program, and I know there were certain sideboards on that program and their decisions for why those existed. Given that experience, are there any things that you'd point out now that maybe you would have changed or maybe done a little bit differently after kind of going through it? Because I mean, I know when you went into it, this was kind of a new idea. So just any perspectives from running that program that you'd like to share would be appreciated.
Yeah, I think there's opportunity to be a little bit, define what the criteria is. Again, what's the outcome? What are the goals of it? For us was trying to get as many boats as we can for homeowners, more of folks that are not associated with a business, because that is historically the sort of calls we would get in our line of dealing with dumped and abandoned trash and unwanted items. We don't know where to go. I don't have any money. My family member passed away. Now I have this boat. So we were looking at that. One of the things, there was a number of marinas that had boats that either were tied to their dock or they had somebody who was leasing a space, and then they ended up becoming defunct in some fashion, and now they had ownership of that. We didn't set the program up for that, but it was clear that there is a need and support for marinas. So what is the balance of what do they need to do upfront to run their business? What is their what's the expectations for them managing their leaseholds and things like that? But where's their opportunities to provide support? I think if there was a simple way to demonstrate need that wouldn't require financial records and things like that, that's a very intensive process. It's not sometimes a lot of folks want to provide those sort of documents, but how do we develop and document the need? For us in this program, we had a short window, so we just wanted to try to get as many vessels as we possibly could. The other challenge was because Metro is a small service boundary within the Tri-County area of Portland. So sections of Multnomah County, Washington County, and Clackamas County, we were kind of limited for that section. So we definitely had folks, for us, we just said the boat had to be within the Metro service boundary. Someone could have lived outside of it, but the boat's impacting the waterways there. So those were some things really, as Aaron had mentioned, what is the goal? What is the outcome? And then prioritizing where's the biggest impact, therefore the biggest benefit, because we had a limited amount of funds. And that's why we again, we focus primarily on individuals and less so on businesses.
Great, thank you very much. And again, Metro's experience is proving very useful here with that background. I saw some hands go up online. Troy.
Thank you. So we have an application process for our vessel turning program, and that's how we address a lot of these concerns. It as far as someone being affluent or not, vessels on water or in marinas or on shore. We found that the application process allows us to prioritize those based on their threats to human safety and the environment. And let me give you an example of that. If we don't prioritize vessels that are on trailers on shore, then we've found that they get filled up with whatever trash they have in the yard at the time, and then they get abandoned at the boat launch with that trash in them. So that's a threat to the environment that is a higher priority than, let's say, a regular dinghy in the marina, even though it's on the water. So it's tricky. So you have to take it case by case, and that's why we have an application process. We also allowed people to contribute to our program, so we can accept grants and gifts and donations and stuff like that from anyone, so they can contribute what they can to these programs. Also, the cost sharing, not only can they contribute, but through the application process, we can require them to take off all of the fuel, all of the trash on the vessel and stuff like that, which lowers your cost in the disposals and stuff like that. So plus we require them to take it to a haul out facility of our choice. Stuff like that can really help share the costs and lower the cost per vessel. So I just wanted to throw some of those ideas out there. Thank you.
That's great, Troy. And again, having another a program that's been in place for you to share your experience is helpful. And also bringing up when it comes to the sideboards that we were talking about here, the environmental factors as being one of those sideboards to consider. Next, I believe we have, I think that's Aaron. My eyes aren't that great. There we go. Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron Bretz, Director of Operations for the Port of Newport. I just wanted, my suggestion has more to do with moving the process, and that would be if the methodology that we adopt is that we're going to allocate enough money to determine whether it's effectual, then we really need to have a meeting or really carve out an agenda item that talks about how we measure that, because if it really is going to focus the decisions that we make on how to quantify this super. I mean, it's going to make it a big deal. Like if you look at Metro's example, their goal was to get rid of as many vessels as they possibly could. Like I was saying, that probably worked well for them. But when you apply this statewide, the types of vessels that you deal with, using the quantity of how many vessels you're going to get rid of doesn't really mean a lot. And gross tonnage, if yardage, if we go by yardage, that's a measure of area. Gross tonnage is a measure of area in the marine world. So, if we can come up with, and I recognize that I think usually the only way you determine gross tonnage is by a marine surveyor, but we could put some general, criteria in there to estimate the gross tonnage of a very small vessel, and some in between there, and that might give us a way to really measure what we're doing, so we could communicate how many, gross tons of vessels we got rid of last year or what we're funding for. That's my recommendation.
Great. Thank you very much, Aaron. And thank you for moving on to the last question with regard to how do you know it's going to be effective, and recognizing the number of boats may not be one of the key measurements. Tonnage might be a key measurement. Let's move on, if it's all right with the group, because I don't see any hands up, and we've got a number of other questions for you. Let's talk about education, outreach, and messaging. And so the question is, when it comes to education, what is the message that you want to be giving? Who's the audience going to be? And should you advise on available resources or on responsible ownership? So there's a lot of different things in that first question, but if anybody wants to tackle that. Dorothy?
Yeah, this is Dorothy Deal with the Oregon State Marine Board. I receive a lot of calls and emails from people all over the state wanting information from me and they assume that I'll have it because we're the Marine Board. And so I've ended up having to do a lot of research on behalf of boat owners looking for facilities that will accept their boat and what they might need to do to their boat before it can be accepted. And I've found that surprisingly, it's very difficult for a lot of people to just take that first step and figure out where their local landfill is, how to call them. It's just something that has been on their to-do list for a really long time. And for various reasons, they have felt like it's just not possible. And so then sometimes when I look at Google Maps and I point out to them where their landfill is and that I've already called them and I know that they'll take up to a 16-foot boat, I make the suggestion of, do you know anybody who does have a pickup truck who could tow the boat there for you? They're surprised that it's possible. And so I think some of the outreach could be as simple as just outlining some of those logistics for people.
So really kind of focusing on the available resources, what you're saying is so people know where to go. Good, good. Yeah, Mike.
Mike Dunning, Port Coos Bay. Yeah, kind of tag on with what Dorothy said. You know, I think the reality is the folks that are going to abandon and dump boats, you're never going to get the message across to them. But she brought up a great point. I think there's an opportunity kind of focusing back in on our goal of, to me, is boats in the water, and that we need to maybe get the message out there and help, I don't know, provide framework locally to the counties for folks or to the agencies where people call in exactly what Dorothy said, to be able to say, look, this is pretty easy. This is where you can go. This is how this works. And help them along, and then they're paying for it, because there's probably a lot of folks that will pay for it. But the second we start telling everybody the boat that's sitting in their yard will pay to get rid of it for you, they're going to let the taxpayer pay for it. They're not going to get rid of it.
So jumping on what Dorothy said and just reemphasizing having those resources available. I think one of the things that you pointed out, Mike, is that there may be a certain audience that you're not going to reach. There is a target audience for this where they may be looking but don't know where to look for how to deal with that. Dorothy?
Well, I feel like I should also just say that it isn't always easy. And so I said 16 feet in my example, because a lot of times facilities do have pretty strict limits on what they will accept and what the person needs to do to prepare their boat to take it there. So I don't want to give the impression that I've helped every customer that has called me, because sometimes the answer is your boat is 21 feet and the closest landfill within 100 miles of you says no boats. And so then I'm not really able to advise them any farther than that, because they're going to have to start looking into professional companies that can come in and, you know, demolish the boat in order to take it where it needs to go. So I just want to point out that it isn't always super easy just because they call and I give them an answer. Sometimes it is, and that's great and really satisfying. Sometimes it's very, very unsatisfying to try to help people and there really aren't any reasonable resources for them.
So being able to have those resources to direct them to is going to be an important part of that equation. Oh, well, the hand disappeared up there, so I'm going to go to Mike.
Being back and forth, Mike Dunning, Port Coos Bay. So, and maybe it's not, we're just looking at existing resources. Maybe it's as part of this program, the state's setting up contracts. I don't know how many throughout the state where these folks can go to. They're still paying for it, but now they have the ability to take a 30-foot boat, a 28-foot boat, because we've created that avenue through this program to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Stan?
Stan Tonneson, Rocky Point Marina and Boatyard, and board member of WOO. Yesterday, I did a simple search, just Googled turn-in programs. It showed Florida, California, and Washington, and all the information is there. That you need to know the application, how it works, what you might be responsible for, sources that do take them. So that would be a means of having it out there. I would assume we would do that. as far as the next question, since I'm talking form of active assistance as a marina owner, I would be more than happy. It's something that we do anyway. We just need more tools to make it happen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Good suggestion. Let's go online here. And Aaron.
Thank you, Aaron Brett, Port of Newport. So I think one of the things that I think about, especially with us out here, is not just the disposal point, but also everything leading up to it. So like Rocky Point, it would be a great example because I'd imagine they can hoist boats and they can dispose of them right there. But somebody who's out here in the marina, let's say they got a 30-foot boat, that boat's not going to go on a trailer. It's going to need to get hoisted. And kind of with what Dorothy was bringing up is that people kind of, when they hang on to something for years and years until it dilapidates to the point that it's useless like this, or that this is their last option is to just throw this thing in a dump someplace. They've oftentimes compounded the issue in their own mind so much that you really need to walk them through how to get it to that final point. So I think not just disposal points, but bearing in mind we're trying to do this for boats from 16 foot up to however big. But where can they get it hoisted? And how can they find out what that cost is going to be like? That process, if they can just like pay them to get rid of it and they're done with it, or are they going to need to pay somebody to come in and do a survey? We really got to set it up so that it's super easy for them and tell them all the steps. I think that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. I want at this point just to point out, what we're talking about here is messaging and getting the message out and to what audience. There are going to be a lot of things that are going to be on the other side of the messaging that still need to be dealt with in terms of the programs or the resources to direct them to. But when it comes down to the messaging and who the audience is, that's what we'd like to hear a little bit more about. So, Troy.
Thank you. So I put a couple links in the chat, and I don't know if Kate will be able to bring them up for you or not, but on our website, we have handouts that we also mail out to any marinas or port districts that would like to have these so they can put them in their boards for educational purposes of the vessel owners. And these are resources that vessel owners can use to deal with their vessels in a responsible manner before they ever even look at the vessel turn-in program. As well as we have a map on our website as well, where they can take these vessels to be responsibly disposed of or hauled out, and so they can take it to a landfill or something like that. So I think the message is always, what can the vessel owner do to be responsible for their property first? And that's why we have the application process, as well as the affidavit of insufficient funds that Metro also uses. Sure. So it's a mix. I mean, you're going to get the responsible ones to do the responsible things, but it's the ones that are irresponsible that you really are going to have the problems with. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Troy. And it's nice to see an example up on the screen in terms of what you've done. That's a nice visual for us to see. Stephanie?
I just wanted to add, Stephanie with Metro, I just wanted to add is the discussion about like finding a landfill, getting into the disposal location. It's not just as simple as like, I have a boat, this facility can accept. As Dorothy indicated, that there is size restrictions based on that facility's authorizations from the state, and you can't just take any boat. There is an assessment that needs to be done, like what sort of hazards are on the boat, is there asbestos on the boat, those sort of things. So I know it's been common for folks to just start chopping it up so they can meet the size restrictions. So there's just some environmental safety and just handling requirements. And I'd recommend with whatever decisions are made to coordinate with DEQ on that for those disposal requirements, just so the more information as far as resources is making sure people know what they need to do, how to look for those sort of things. There's already a lot of resources, but having it in one concise location where everyone can kind of look for that, either maybe based on the county or just who, maybe there's point folks, because it gets really confusing very quickly. Like for instance, knew an entity, won't say any names, knew an entity that were just chopping boats up, and then there was all these stormwater issues. So it was just like, please call me. We'll deal with the dumped and abandoned boat in a way that you're not causing these issues. So there's just a lot of nuances when it comes to disposal requirements, to making sure whoever's handling it and then whoever's receiving it, that everyone is in the know. So just another plug to make sure whatever decisions are made with regards to that you bring DEQ in to help assist in developing those resources. Or as Mike had suggested, is there identified contracted entities who have voluntarily said, hey, I can take these vessels, here's the information I can take and under what circumstances. It helps having that information. It kind of takes some of the pressure off the state. Always have to do that. People know what to do, and the path seems less onerous, either in real life or perception. People sometimes are more willing and able to kind of manage these things on themselves. So I just wanted to just put that out there. There's a lot of nuance when it comes to disposal requirements.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I know, we're talking about prevention here, but I think your point with regard to disposal has a parallel here on the prevention side. And what I was hearing is, when we get down to the point of talking about messaging and directing people to different programs or different places, it's going to be important that that messaging be consistent and vetted across the different agencies that are involved, to make sure that the message is not being contradictory or causing other harm that might occur. So thank you, Stephanie, for that. Josh?
Actually, I wasn't planning on this, but I'm just going to kind of mirror what you had just said. Like, there is certainly a prevention piece here, in that, if we are not, if we're messaging, hey, do the right thing, and yet we have not fully vetted what the right thing is, is the right thing actually available, then we're failing on that prevention front. So what I'm kind of hearing from the group is, we certainly at DSL need to build the capacity to connect customers with resources, but also I think we need to make sure that we connect better with removal, disposal, private sector folks, as well as the regulatory agencies, to identify where there's these inherent gaps, as Dorothy had pointed out, like some size boats in some parts of the state. There's not an easy solution. But I think it's incumbent upon us at DSL with this program to see, hey, where could we grease the wheels on this a little bit? Hey, there's a gap here for this size of boat. I mean, get with DEQ, get with local authorities, get with local trash haulers, et cetera, and see what we can do to alleviate that. Because if we don't, then the program ceiling is only so high, so to speak. So I appreciate this conversation. Thank you. And thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Josh. Looks like Mark Landauer.
Yeah, so one of the things that struck me.
Mark, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Oh, forgive me. I apologize. Mark Landauer with the Oregon Public Ports Association. One thing that struck me with Dorothy's explanation of trying to help people out was there were certain landfills that have size restrictions and so forth. I guess my question for that, I realize landfill owners don't want to take an aircraft carrier for their disposal. And I don't think we would want to do that. However, I would be curious to know whether it's a regulatory issue from DEQ in restricting the size of vessels that can be disposed of, because there may need to be some discussion with, for example, DEQ. I know that DEQ requires a bunch of asbestos testing and lead-based testing and so forth. I'd just be curious to know whether Dorothy has any insight on as to why some of these landfills have a size restriction. I mean, there's obviously a practical reason for it, because you don't want the USS Nimitz to be disposed of in Arlington. But at the same time, I'm curious if she has any insight on that. Thank you.
Mark, can I ask you to just clarify before Dorothy responds, in terms of, can you link that back to the prevention to the education outreach piece?
Yeah, because I think what we're trying to do, and I agreed with Josh in his statement that, we need to be doing education and prevention, I think, in tandem, right? We want the responsible people to have resources available to them to know where they can take their vessels to be adequately and properly disposed. So what I'm getting at here, sir, is that if there's a way for us to expand the opportunities for those to deal responsibly with their vessels, we ought to look at those opportunities as well. And so what I'm driving at is if there's a 16-foot limitation, what's the reason for that? And is there a way we can maybe push the envelope to get it to 22 feet? I mean, that will capture some more vessels in that area and allow people to deal responsibly with their vessels. So that was sort of what I was driving at. Thank you.
Thanks for the clarification, Dorothy.
I'm actually going to defer to Stephanie. She's much more educated on this topic than I am.
Stephanie.
Stephanie with Metro. To getting to Mark's question, it's a combination of factors. It can deal with the authorization approvals from the state. It could also be pertaining to some local land use approvals, all have a factor in there. It also has to do with the facility's capacity to take the larger vessels. Some folks might have the space to manage it, others may not. So it's also up to the facility operator, their desire to manage that. I know a couple facilities will reluctantly take a boat that's about 18 feet, but they really don't want it over 16 because of the limitations they have once it's on site. They will take a boat that's larger. They'll happily take any size if you can cut it up and fit it in, put it into a dumpster. They don't care what the size is, as long as you've done the assessment. So it's a combination of factors of what can I take? I don't want to take it. So maybe it's like they'll do it for a price, which is understandable. So it's a combination of factors. What is the capacity of the facility? Do they have the right tools and equipment to manage it? And do they have the authorization and approvals from DEQ, their local land use, and anybody else that might be regulating that operation?
And so going back to, again, I'm going to keep driving back to the topic at hand here with regard to messaging and education. Being able to answer those questions as part of the message is going to be important. So, okay, Josh.
Sorry, Stephanie, another follow-up question for you. And I'm sorry, I haven't been introducing myself, Josh Mahalam, DSL. So if I'm intrigued by this idea of the state DSL using resources to address some of those like limitations, as you representing an entity that also runs landfills, what might is there a mechanism for that? I mean, if the state was to come to any garbage facility like that, what could realistically be done? How could the state subsidize this work, so to speak? Go ahead. Sorry.
Again, Stephanie from Metro. Well, I couldn't speak for operators. It would really be a great conversation with those transfer stations, material recovery facilities, landfill operators, what their limitations would be. If it ends up, say, it's a limitation with their DEQ permit or land use, I think it's always something that can be a discussion can be had and say, okay, this is creating a barrier to allowing us to address an issue. And I think there's always worth a conversation, but I think the first conversation is with the facilities that are authorized or to take these materials. What are they willing and able to manage? Understanding what either their limitations may be or their lack of interest. I think that could then help understand what the needs are and maybe what sort of the barriers that need to be navigated, or where there's a potential for some incentive, and where that incentive comes from depends on what the issue is that you're trying to address. So my recommendation would be engaging those. And I think there's plenty of people on this work group that probably know their local resources could start having those conversations, but it's hard to answer that without knowing each facility, whether or not they take it, what their limitations may be, or if they have no limitations, they've just created them just for an operational sort of need.
Great. Thank you again, Stephanie. All right, in the interest of time, I do see one more hand up. Troy, do you have another piece to add about this?
Just real quick, I'm sorry. So we use the vessel turning program here in Washington State as a carrot too. So we have the message to private marinas that if they partake in or participate in the insurance law that we have here in Washington, then they have access to the vessel turning program. If they don't, then they don't have access to the vessel turning program. Also, vessel owners that their vessels may have become abandoned and derelict, we encourage them to deal with the vessels and then offer them the vessel turning program once the vessel becomes non-abandoned and derelict. So it's kind of a carrot to both private industry as well as the private vessel owners.
Hey, thank you very much, Troy.
Thank you.
Sorry, Stan, I just noticed that you had your name tan up.
Thank you. Stan Tonneson, Rocky Point Marina and Woo. This question for to Troy, to ride on the coattails of the how large a vessel can be to take to the dump. My understanding is in the state of Washington, and this hasn't come up, but you have a deconstruction facility, a couple of them, one down in Ilwaco and one up in the Seattle area. It's a centralized area where you can take larger vessels, I believe. Could you share a little more information about that?
Yes, thanks for bringing that up. I actually shared a map with Kate earlier. I don't know if she can bring it up, but we have a map that informs private vessel owners where they can take these vessels and participate in the vessel deconstruction in a safe and environmentally friendly manner. We don't do any destructions of vessels unless it's in an NPDES permitted facility, which is just a fancy way of saying the Clean Water Act. So yes, we do have facilities. We actually helped Ilwaco build their facility. We had a rural program that actually dumped money into that for them so that they could deconstruct these vessels in a safe way so that the runoff from those deconstruction sites don't pollute the waters and stuff like that. So yes, we do have maps and stuff like that, as well as information handouts for anyone who wants to partake in the program. So that's the map that we had built and we put on our website, and it gives vessel owners in those areas obviously an opportunity to have a conversation with these people about how to dispose of their vessels in a responsible manner.
Thank you, Troy. And I really love the examples that you're putting here online. It goes right back to the public education piece, and it's really nice to see something that's a tangible example that's currently happening. All right. We really do need to move on, but Mike, you had your name tan up. You sure? Okay. We'll give you 2 sentences. Okay. All right.
I'll take them then. Mike Dunning, Portuguese Bay. Yeah, we keep kind of circling back to what we talked about earlier. I know it's not prevention, but they're describing it well, Troy, with the state of Washington. I think for this program to work successfully, we need to have identified facilities that can do this work. And like Stephanie said, it's not about the size of it. Crunch it up, you put it in a container as long as it's had all of its testing. We do boat destruction in our shipyard. We have our NPDES permit there because it is a shipyard. We get all of our testing done as required by DEQ. We're a site that could do this. You identify some of these sites and locations that can take care of this, and these vessels can be brought here, and that owner can again pay for it themselves. It's a resource for them to come and do that. So I think that's the only way this program is really going to be successful, is identifying that, taking some of these funds that have been designated to do that.
Okay, thank you for the 2 sentences, and let's move on and let's talk about the insurance part of prevention. Should there be insurance requirements, and for who? Not seeing any. Oh, here we go. Troy is chiming in.
And sorry about that again. So Insurance here in Washington, we require all marinas to have insurance against abandoned and derelict vessels, both pollution and liability. We also require all tenants that have a long-term tenant agreement with the marina or port district to have insurance. Otherwise, they don't have access to the derelict vessel removal account, which includes not only derelict and abandoned vessels, but the vessel turning program. But that has an unintended effect that we've noticed, that once they no longer have insurance or able to pay for the insurance, they end up anchored out on state-owned aquatic lands. So you may be just pushing the problem out of the marinas and onto the state's own lands. So insurance is a tricky egg to crack. And I don't have all of the answers for that. I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
And not an easy solution. Okay, Josh.
Well, Troy, since you're already at the mic, I'll keep you in the hot seat. A question regarding Washington's, I guess it's the secondary liability law, but if someone sells a boat of a certain size, of a certain age, they are required to make sure that the buyer has insurance for at least 1 year. And if that doesn't occur, then the seller could be held secondarily liable for anything that might happen with that vessel. So first part of my question is, if that statement was incorrect, please tell me. But then what I'm interested in is the availability of that insurance product in Washington, because that's kind of it's a relatively unique insurance product to say, we will insure against your item becoming a detriment to the state or a jurisdiction for them having to remove it. So I've been curious about what the availability of those products looks like in Washington.
Thanks, Josh. Those are great questions. So one thing that we did that really encouraged the secondary liability law is we made the abandonment or dereliction of a vessel in state waters illegal. So that opened up the avenue for liability insurance on those vessels. So if the owners are liable for the damages done to state-owned aquatic lands, or because they're criminally liable for an act, then they can use that insurance to deal with that. We also did pollution, because obviously if the vessel releases any pollution, we want to be able to go in there and clean up that event. The secondary liability law is just as you stated, except that they have to do a vessel inspection on the vessel with a certified surveyor. They have to document that inspection, and they have to send it into my office. And if they don't do that, then the seller does not shed their liability of the secondary liability. So the whole point behind the secondary liability law is for the seller to make sure that the buyer is set up to be a responsible vessel owner. And if they can't do that, then they would have the secondary liability. And if they can do it, then they can shed that liability by performing the inspection as asked and send it into my office.
Great. Thank you, Troy. Josh, follow up.
Just one more follow up. What does enforcement of that look like? I mean, how often are you dealing with examples where a seller is secondarily liable under that law, and your agency, I assume, is looking to enforce on them or recoup costs?
That's a great question. It's not used as much as I would like to see it used. However, we have used it as a stick, meaning we've had tugs that have been abandoned out on state-owned aquatic lands because the tugging companies have decided that it's cheaper just to sell the tug to some person who has great dreams and aspirations and no resources than dealing with it properly. So then when it becomes abandoned and derelict, we'll contact them and say, you realize you have secondary liability, right? So if we have to take this vessel and we can't get the money out of the current owner, we're coming after you. And then those tugs disappear. So the tug company goes back and repossesses them and deals with them properly. So it has worked to an extent.
Thank you, Troy. Mike
Dunning, Port Coos Bay. So Troy, has that ever been adjudicated? A secondary liability case? I could see that being a blast.
No, it has not been adjudicated yet. I don't look forward to that, but I guess the AG's office might.
And is that by vessel size? I mean, I can't imagine that you have that constraint on a 18-foot vessel. That somebody's going to go pay a surveyor to
Oh, no,
survey an 18-foot vessel.
Great question. So the size of the vessel it has to be over 35 feet, and it has to be older than 40 years old. So anything below those requirements are not covered under the secondary liability. We're mainly looking for all of those vessels that are old, dilapidated at the end of their life, as well as those vessels that are on the water, because most of your 35-foot and over vessels aren't being taken out of the water.
Great, thank you. Josh?
Sorry, Troy, one last one, I promise, and then I'll be done. How often are you getting those reports to your office of the report of a sale of a big old boat, and that the inspection was conducted and that the proper insurance was secured?
So an example of that was the John Cobb. You can look it up online. It was an old NOAA vessel that broke its drive shaft, and they determined that they couldn't replace it, so they sold it to the Seattle Maritime Academy, who sold it to a known derelict vessel owner who abandoned it at the Port of Port Townsend. I know that's a lot of history. I'm sorry. So the Port of Port Townsend was then stuck with this vessel, and so they had to go through the survey and everything in order to get this vessel transferred. Unfortunately, the vessel went to Oregon. I don't know what happened to it after that, but they did actually shed their secondary liability before they just sold the vessel, basically. And there have been other cases where they've actually gone through the process and actually put in the effort and the time, and they've shed their secondary liability as well. And because they've done that, I think they found responsible vessel owners, and the vessels haven't become abandoned or derelict since.
Great. Thank you again. So Josh, just making sure is not a follow-up. Okay. All right. So going back to insurance requirements, any other thoughts with regard to what the insurance requirements, if any, should be, and for who, aside from what's already been talked about? Stephanie?
I just have Stephanie with Metro. I just have a question. Would there ever be a scenario where it would warrant requiring an insurance policy payable to the state if in the event it was derelict or abandoned? So just thinking about, there's been a number of vessels that were purchased because they were going to repurpose it to a museum or some other sort of use. I don't know what that would entail, but just wanted to put that out there. Would there be a case that would warrant it? I don't know all the details that would go into it, but that way there's some preventative. Anyhow, just a thought.
So, I mean, I'll weigh in on that. And I'm surprised right now that there's been some silence, because that very thing was suggested by quite a few folks on the work group and other folks that were interviewed during the summer. I think there's a case to be made for it, whether it's some class of vessels, something similar to what Washington does, where old boats, big boats, ones that we know are potentially more of a liability, that requiring some sort of insurance on those if they're going to be in the water, certainly if they're going to be sold. I think that's certainly on the table. I'll admit a question that I've had on that is, oftentimes in ADV or ADV tangent, I mean, similar situations, there are other state requirements that are not being followed. And so I've always been skeptical of, okay, if you introduce another requirement, hey, it needs to be registered, but it also needs to be, insured with this kind of policy. I wonder what the incentive is for folks to actually do that. And that's actually part of my question number 2 that's on there is what would how do we check on compliance? What does enforcement look like? What are the consequences? And I just walk away, we still have a boat that we're going to end up dealing with. So I admittedly don't have the answer there, but that's something that I'd like to vet through this group.
All right.
Mike Dunning, Fort Hughes Bay. I would agree, Josh, and I'm sure we'll get the consequences at some point during this work group. Maybe not today, but I'm in big favor of insurance on vessels. I insure my small vessel. Obviously a responsible boat owner, but we insure cars. And how do we ensure people have insurance on vehicles? Many people ride around with no insurance on their vehicles. They get pulled over, they don't have insurance, they have to deal with it. It should be no different for vessels. You get pulled over by marine enforcement and you don't have insurance, you get a ticket, you deal with it. But to be able to run around without any general liability, pollution coverage, salvage removal, it's crazy to me.
And my point of clarification, you're talking about all vessels regardless of size, recreation, commercial.
Yeah, I think you gotta, the definition of a vessel, right? Anything that can move over the water that's floating, okay, maybe not a kayak, but power driven vessels of a certain horsepower and over, absolutely. Sailing vessels, yes.
Okay, sounds good. I used to have a styrofoam sailboat. Would that have counted? No, okay. All right, yes.
Yes,
Stan.
Stan Honest and Rocky Point Marina. I want to ditto what Mike said. I am full favor of having all boats should have insurance, just in general. And most marinas do require it now. We have one issue that comes up now. Insurance companies, people that have insurance, they have an accident with their boat, their motor, whatever. It becomes totaled. So they write them a check for the replacement value, and then the owner's stuck with the abandoned vessel. So that's just want to bring that possibility up.
Great, thank you very much, Stan. All right, there's some hands coming up on the screen here. Aaron?
Thank you, Aaron Brettsport of Newport. It sounded like Troy, when he was going through what the state of Washington requires of marina owners, I thought he said that they're looking for marinas to be insured against abandoned derelict vessels. And I had asked our insurance company a number of times, can we get insured against the uninsured vessel sinking? And the answer has been no. They said the industry doesn't offer anything like that. They've tried to find it. And so I was wondering, do you guys require that first? And then secondly, I think the key is in like just having general liability insurance in these situations probably isn't enough. I think you need to have wreck removal is usually added on to that. And I think that's kind of what you're describing, where if something happens with the boat, well, anyway, I guess that's a little bit different scenario than what you're describing. But my question was primarily for that, can you get insurance against uninsured vessels?
Okay.
So,
Oh.
Sorry. Yes, we've required them to get insurance for liability and pollution prevention or pollution, dealing with it. And those policies are already available out there. So I don't understand the rest of that question.
Well, what I'm saying is, so if you got a boat and it's old and you try to get insurance on it, and the insurance company is going to send out a surveyor, they're going to look at it, they're going to say, well, this boat's, let's say they say it's not insurable, or it's insurable if you haul it out and you do this list of stuff. And the owner says, no, I'm not going to do that stuff. Basically, the boat is not insurable in its current state. And what I was thinking was that the state of Washington requires the marina owner in that case to get some kind of insurance to cover if that boat fails, if it sinks, if it releases pollution or something like that. Is that what you were describing? Or
yes,
I didn't think that was possible.
Yeah. So when the insurance is required of a marina, they're required to ensure that the vessel owners have insurance at the time they sign the tenant agreement. That doesn't mean that 6 months down the road they can cancel the insurance requirement. And in some cases, some of those marinas have the insurance company tell them that the insurance has been canceled, and so then they get evicted. But yes, the marina still has to have insurance because of those situations where the vessel owner may have canceled the insurance right before it sinks or something like that. And so then they'll have to have something to deal with it. So we've had that happen here in Washington, where a marina did have to enact their insurance policy for a sunk vessel from a tenant who canceled their insurance. And so it's paid off a couple of times.
Okay, thank you, Troy. I think Josh has a follow-up.
Troy, when those requirements were being put in place, how much, if any, did your agency actively work with the insurance industry to make sure that whatever regulatory framework you developed was actually reflected in the private insurance sector.
Well, this happened back in 2016. So what they did is they actually talked to our risk managers over at the Department of Enterprise Services, who handles the insurancing of agencies here in Washington State. And they talked to them about which policies could cover these situations. And that's what they came up with.
Thank you. All right, we're gonna have to move on here pretty quickly. But briefly, Mike.
Mike Dunning, Port Coos Bay. Yeah, Troy, we tested this in Coos Bay about 3 or 4 years ago with our insurance company. We had a boat sink, and it was $60,000 to bring in the barges to remove it from the water. And they weren't going to cover it, but for the fact that we could prove the case that the navigation channel was adjacent and that boat could have broke loose and blocked the nav channel. Other than that, they would not have paid. We would have been stuck with that bill. So, I mean, we carry pollution liability. We're all required to do it. But when it comes to vessels sinking, there's going to have to be extenuating circumstances for them to cover it.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Blake, did you have something?
Just a general question, maybe for the marina operators. In our work with DAS Risk Management, we've talked to, our counterparts over there about insurance policies that are available. And our understanding is that marina operators, legal liability as well as marine general liability may cover some of these issues, but I'd be interested to hear from those of you who actually have this insurance, if that is part of that coverage or not.
Okay, does anybody want to answer that?
Stan Thomas and Rocky Point Marina and board member of WU. The president of WU is an insurance advisor, senior advisor for his lifetime. And he shopped around, looked around, and there's nothing available that would fit that bill. I've asked my agent if we're covered in that situation. He says no. Sometimes you find a loophole, like Mike said, and they might cover it.
Josh.
Just before we move on to that, I asked Blake to be here to provide just a different perspective on insurance, and I'd like it to be brought forward to the group. So Blake, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. So one idea that kind of has been popping around in my head, thinking about, how do we cover ADV removal or this vessel removal, is to have the state carry insurance, similar to how ODF previously, I don't believe they do it anymore, but had wildfire insurance, where they take a policy out from Lloyd's of London that says, we spend this much money on wildfire and the policy will pay out a certain amount of funds. I think because of the, extreme costs of wildfire, it eventually did not pencil out for ODF to keep it. But I feel like that would be a good solution for at least the group to look at, to explore what that would look like for the state to maybe buy that insurance. If we know we're going to spend certain monies in a fiscal year, in a biennium, then we can anticipate getting coverage to that amount so that we can at least get some sort of payout for our expenses. And would be curious to others' thoughts on that.
Okay. So I know you wanted to hear some other thoughts. What I would suggest at this point, Josh, if this is all right, we're running a little late on time. I'd like to push forward and encourage you to send in any additional thoughts on this to Josh, so that we can add that input into the process. But we want to make sure we get through the rest of the agenda today. So I apologize for cutting this a little short. Josh, did you have something else?
Yeah, just one thing. I mean, all the solutions to these and all the other problems that we're trying to solve in this work group, they don't necessarily need to happen within the 2-hour confines of these meetings. So as certainly some of these insurance questions are complicated, like feel free to reach out to me, other DSL staff, as you think about this. So I again, just I'd like to hear more from some of you than I have over the past couple of months. I mean, this is my primary focus. So if you have thoughts, make sure that they're getting to me, whether it's here or through email, or give me a call. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Great, and we do want to get on to the next topic, but I'm going to briefly touch on these questions. The next topic being disposal, but disposal was brought up a little bit in the last one, so I took a little bit of leeway to take time away from that. All right, so very briefly, how do you measure success in whether or not you're being effective in prevention measures? Any thoughts?
Just, one metric that maybe we can use is number of applications we see in a vessel turn-in program. I would think if we're doing our job, we should see less and less applications over time. And I get that you would have a certain amount of time where you would ramp up a program and you expect to see, more applications year over year. But, as we get into a program and we've run it for a number of years, if we're successful, I would imagine there'd be less boats needing to be turned in than more at a certain point. But that's just one thought.
Okay. Thanks, Blake. Aaron?
Thank you, Aaron Bretz, Port of Newport. I was thinking more along the lines of somehow seeing a drop in abandoned and derelict vessels. I think because I guess it goes back to, again, it depends on how you look at the program. What's the purpose of the program? What's it there for? To me, the purpose of the program is to this is a preventative measure to reduce abandoned and derelict vessels. So the way you measure its success is not how much that program's used, because it could be used for a different purpose, and it still could not actually have an impact on the number of abandoned and derelict vessels. That situation could exist. So you have to measure a reduction in abandoned and derelict vessels, in my mind, to demonstrate success in this program.
Hey, Josh?
Well, and so Eric, I prompted you with this question, and it was kind of loaded in that, we've certainly heard many folks talk about numbers of boats, tonnage, all that money spent on the program. But I'm thinking about this question as, hey, we have to go justify, the need for this program now and going forward. And I'm not necessarily convinced that hey, we removed X boats or why we spent Y money is necessarily going to be satisfactory to all individuals, legislators, whatnot. And so it is truly a good question. Like, how do you show, hey, this is actually working? And I appreciate what Aaron said. Of course, the devil's in the details. How do you actually determine if there's less ADVs this year than last year? That's certainly a challenge, but that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about with this question. So thank you for the input, Aaron and others.
Okay, thank you. All right. Unless we have another burning question here or a comment. Yes?
I have a comment,
Stephanie.
Stephanie with Metro. So as somebody who manages an illegal dumping program, often want to measure whether or not we're successful by the number of tons that have been cleaned up, the number of pounds, but you need some context. So one year we could have very large amount of tonnage, but the number of sites we actually cleaned were significantly less. So in any sort of metric or measurement, I think you need a little bit of context of what you're measuring. And I think it's also challenging to say, how do we measure success without knowing what are the measures that we're putting into place? So I think this is a good question to ask now, but I think it would be good to ask it again when you have kind of fine tuned, like, these 5 to 10 things are the things we're going to do. So how do we, that would give a little bit more information to say, here's how we can measure it. So anyhow, just something to think about.
Thank you, Stephanie. Aaron?
Thank you, Aaron Brett, Port of Newport again. I think, and this goes back to it's same point again that I was making earlier about. I think we heard in the last meeting, there was a state someplace that has some kind of classification system. So you can have a pre-abandoned boat or something like that. And then, you know, boats that are, so if we did something like that, that would enable you to create an inventory of vessels that you're concerned about. And then it would be easier for us to measure this possibly because you'd have some criteria assigned to it. You'd be able to say that, you know, we've seen a drop in different types of classified vessels that are close to being abandoned or whatever the case is. That might be a way to do it. Thank you.
All right, we're gonna go quickly here and then we're going to stop sharply at 45 after the hour for some community comment. If we have an opportunity for additional comment after that, we will take it then. Mark Landauer.
Mark Landauer with the ports. You know, one measure that I think resonates with people is the fact that you can pretty easily calculate the average cost of recovering an abandoned or derelict vessel off the bottom of the you know, the submersible land. We had just 2 examples of vessels that were recovered just west of the I-5 bridge. That was only what, $7 million? Well, I realize that those are very large vessels, but you can monetize to some extent the prevention of these sunken vessels to legislators. It makes sense to them. I mean, we are here today because they remember Goebel. They remember the I-5 2 vessels that were recovered there last year. There is a way to tell this story, and I'm sure they're more excited about prevention than they are paying the pound of the cure.
Great. Thank you, Mark. All right, and that also gets back to the messaging piece a little earlier as well. Okay, Dorothy.
Thank you, Dorothy Deal, Oregon State Marine Board. Something that Aaron Brett said made me kind of realize that certain preventative measures are targeting certain types or categories of ADVs that we actually see out there. And so some of those different types include the boats that are dumped on purpose. There's boats that are moored where the owner abandons them for whatever reason, whether it's a hospital situation or a death or a lack of resources, it gets abandoned. Where that wasn't planned, whereas you're going out and dumping a boat, you're planning to do that. And then there are boats where they're actually being actively used, but something goes wrong. It hits a sandbar and there's damage, and the owner has good intentions, but doesn't have the resources, can't do it in time. And so it becomes abandoned that way. And so when we're talking about measuring the success of our preventative measures, I think we need to make sure that we're looking at what was that preventative measure targeting? Are we seeing a reduction in that target versus boats that might come in from out of state, and we weren't targeting those through any of our preventative measures necessarily?
Thank you, Dorothy. And I think that definitely correlates, I believe, with what Stephanie was saying earlier, with regard to, tying it to the measure that you're the preventative program or measure, to be able to then target what that metric is. The fair statement? Okay, great.
Mike Dunning, Port Hughes Bay. And this may have been said when I stepped out, and in that we need to make sure we're all clear, and we may have done it in a previous meeting, but of what the goals, right? We measure our success against the goals of the program, and making sure that we all understand as a work group what the goals of this program are going to be in fine detail, because I don't know that I've seen that yet. I've seen a higher arching goal when we started this work group, but I haven't seen us sit down and go, this is the goal of this program, this is what we want to do. Then we can look at how we're going to measure against those goals. Kind of tagging on to what Mark said, one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit today is resources to get rid of these vessels and deal with them in a perfect world, not the world we're living in today, but in a perfect world, we should see costs go down if we set this up appropriately, because, a lot of these removals are one-offs. and one-offs are expensive. If we set up resources along the coast, inland, wherever, certain parts of the state, that we can get rid of these vessels, and there's a program in place, contracts in place, we should see a reduction in cost of dealing with these vessels.
Great, thank you, Mike. And just to kind of recap a little bit of what I think I just heard, there were a couple of different pieces that you brought up. I mean, one is what you said at the end, which is hopefully what you're going to see is a cost reduction in terms of what's being spent on this issue moving forward. But the other thing that I heard at the very beginning is it's going to be important if you're going to set metrics for this for prevention and also for the program in general, that you have a set of goals, objectives from which those are derived. And as you do with a strategic plan, where you have the broader arching goals, and then you have the connectivity all the way down through the actual implementation. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. I think at this point, unless there are any immediate comments, let's move directly into community input if there is any. And then with any remaining time that we have, we'll come back to some of this discussion. So we'll move on to the community input slide. And for those of you who are not on the work group and would like to share your comments with the work group, what we ask is, and I assume there's no one here, I don't believe, in the community here in person, but if you're online, please raise your hand. We'll call on you in the order that you raise your hand. And but please make sure your mic is muted unless it's your turn to speak. And when it is, please limit your comments to 2 minutes, and please make sure to say your name and where you're from, the organization you're representing, if any. All right, so with that, do we have any community comment online? We'll give it 30 seconds just in case somebody's trying to find that right button that they need to press to raise their hand. I know for me, it's always difficult. I'm always looking at the wrong side of the computer. All right. So not seeing any community input requested.
I'll interrupt if I
Yes.
could, so you can get back to what you're talking about. I'm Vicki Walker. I'm the director of the department, and met many of you before, and nice to see you here. The conversation has been robust, and I really appreciate it. I've not been involved in all of the meetings because we have competing meetings, but I'm really looking forward to this, and the conversation today has been awesome. So thank you very much. We have a report to deliver to the legislature in February, and we'll be ready to do that, won't we, Kate?
Yes, we got it.
Yeah, well, you'll help put her together, but our comms people here are brilliant about writing and putting it together in a nice, clean package. So thank you. And I'm going to get back to some other things. I got stuck on the freeway today with a trailer tractor rig that overturned around the Kubler exit. So I was out there for about 30 minutes or so until I could work my way over to the exit and get out. It was across the entire length of the freeway. So be careful out there.
Thank you, Vicki. Appreciate your joining us today. All right. So Josh, would you like to move on to the disposal discussion?
Yes, please.
All right. Do you have a preamble for that?
I do, a relatively short one. There was a pretty simple slide, but we can forego it. But I did want to leave a little bit of time at the end of the day today, if we had it, and we do, to just revisit the topic of salvage and disposal. We touched on it quite a bit when we were discussing contracting and procurement. And then also we visited it earlier today when we were talking about the education piece, which is fine. A lot of these things are intrinsically, tied together and interconnected. So I certainly don't mind the conversation going from disposal to prevention, because it's all part to the same end. But anyway, I wanted to come back to salvage disposal, and there are conversations happening with some contractors that we've worked with regarding their challenges regarding disposal, certainly with DEQ on some of the environmental regulations and permitting that we touched on before. And I know some of that information has still been flowing to me, but I wanted to bring this back to the group, and just make sure that there's an opportunity for any ideas, that anyone has to make disposal, better, cheaper, more environmentally responsible. The idea of recycling gets thrown around all the time, but its efficacy, at least, and cost effectiveness have proved somewhat limited in attempts at that before. So again, open forum on salvage and disposal, and any thoughts that DSL specifically, things that we could consider going forward. Feel free to bring those forward now.
It's nicely summarized. And so we have a couple of questions up here, but getting to the overall question that Josh was asking in terms of what should DSL do, if anything, to address the issue. Not seeing tents go up, not seeing hands go up. Mike.
Sure, I'll say something. I mean, again, I think for us, and I know Aaron Bretz is on this call, we have the capabilities to haul vessels out, deal with it. Is it fun? No. Sometimes, usually the larger vessels, we're going out and hiring a contractor to actually come in with excavators and actually destroy them, put them in containers, dumpsters, and then hauling it off to the dump. But for us, again, it's mostly a funding issue, getting funding to deal with these vessels.
Yeah, always comes back to funding, doesn't it? All right, Josh.
Thank you, Mike. So this actually goes back to a topic from I guess a couple meetings ago, but heard certainly that funding is the biggest barrier there. Does that framework in which funding is available, it's earmarked, you say you have the boat, and we discussed earlier before the meeting, a couple of vessels that you're concerned with, you call us, we have about, yes, we can pay for that, send us the bill. Does that general framework work for you in most situations, or is it not quite that simple?
For Coos Bay, it does. It works in most situations for us. Again, depending, like we talked earlier, these vessels are too big for us to haul out at our facility. So those are obviously a little more of a problem for us, but yes.
So for vessels that end up at your facility that can't be hauled out, I assume they also weren't launched at your facility, right? They came from somewhere down the coast or up the coast, right? Is this, so I'll show some of my unfamiliarity with, what happens in some of the bigger coastal ports. Like when a 120-foot boat comes into your facility, especially one that seems questionable from a seaworthiness perspective or whatever, how do you view that from a management perspective?
Well, I'm not going to say it never happens that somebody comes in out of the blue. That's one of those larger vessels. A lot of times it's legacy vessels at the marina. These vessels have been fished for year after year after year. And then they just get to a certain state of condition that they just stop fishing. We obviously, like all the our sister ports along the coast, we've started insurance. We've implemented insurance almost 2 years ago. Everybody's required to have it. Of course, we had a bunch of legacy vessels that were still in there. I think we only have a handful that don't have insurance. We continue to work with them to try to get them insurance. They're active fishing vessels, but that's usually how it happens. And these boats get degraded, and it's back to the conversation earlier. they get sold very cheap to just pass the buck, because now you got this large vessel that can't be hauled out in Coos Bay and easily dealt with. What do I do with it? I sell it to this guy who has a dream over here for $3,000, and now it's his problem, not my problem. That's how it ends up working.
Okay, thank you. Oh, there's some hands up here online, and Aaron.
Thank you. Aaron Bretz from the Port of Newport. I had two things. One of them is, so it's when Mike says, when he mentioned funding being a barrier, I think it's important to understand that, there are situations when you have to charge fees and you run a facility. Sometimes you charge fees because you're trying to encourage a certain type of use. So, for example, we don't want our international terminal to be used as a maintenance location, so we charge shipping rates there, and it puts it in a completely different realm. It puts it in a different world of cost, so that you cannot use the facility. If you're interested in paying your fees, you cannot use that facility for that purpose because there's no way you can afford it. Sometimes um, I mean, there's two ports here in Yaquina Bay, Port of Toledo, Port of Newport. Port of Toledo works in their own interest, and if I work for the Port of Toledo, I would discourage these vessels from coming in there too, because the problems that we're talking about with these type of vessels follow them around, right? So I think that there needs to be a broad engagement to get everybody on board with this, and to assist any kind of funding problems when you run into a situation where somebody doesn't want to handle a vessel because of some cost associated with it. That's where we need to subsidize or do something about the cost there to get it down, because otherwise they you know the cost for us, we're going to get charged a fee that is not possible. It's just not possible to pay. Secondly, you were talking about the management and the movement of vessels up and down the coast. We do get boats that come in. And we get both, boats that have been here for a while, and then ones that get towed in from offshore. There was just one recently, and I worked with the Department of State Lands, they got towed in by the Coast Guard. The operator was fairly incompetent, and the vessel itself was not in the greatest shape, but it wound up here at the pier because the Coast Guard towed it in because he called for assistance, and they won't tow him into some place where they don't have services to provide it. So they're not going to tow this boat into Garibaldi. Generally speaking, they're not going to tow it into Depot Bay because it won't fit, or it doesn't, whatever the case. They're not going to tow it into Florence. So because the bar's not good enough and there's no services there, they may not even tow them into Winchester Bay. So what that does is it creates an entire swath of the coast where if any boat out there breaks down, it's in questionable condition in transit from Puget Sound down to wherever or vice versa, we get them here. And that happens enough that it's a problem. We can't turn them away. Otherwise, like with that boat that came in here a few months back, we were all over the guy left and right, trying to get him to get that thing out of here. Just tell him, look, you cannot give us insurance. You can't pay your mortgage. You need to leave. But at the end of the day, it's tough because you don't have what am I going to do? Am I going to kick him out into the bay? Are we going to kick him out? He's going to wind up, again, what he did is he drug anchor, called the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard towed him back to our pier. And that's just the cycle of things. So that's a real problem that we got to come up with some solutions to it, whatever those are.
Thank you, Aaron. We're running short on time, but we got a couple of hands and tents up. So Stan, I believe you might be next.
Stan Tonneson, Rocky Point Marina and Boatyard. For us, getting the derelict boats ADVs out is not funding. I have offered and continue to do it for free, not forever free, but we'll haul them and put them on a trailer. I know that Eric now is bidding on 7 boats in Multnomah Channel, 7. Of those I could have hauled out. I would have bought in, hauled out, and put it on a trailer for free. And for us, it's the process and the timing. I would be happy to take care of it as part of the community and my helpfulness. So it's being able to have that right to pull it out right away when it's drifting by abandoned.
Great. So being able to have the authority to do that. Great. Okay. Troy.
Just real quick, you don't have to solve all of your disposal problems yourself. We have a list of contractors that are authorized to remove and abandon and derelict vessels. And what we do is we put out a bid for all of those authorized contractors with our job. Say, hey, this is the job, this is the scope of it, this is what we want. And then they come back with not only their plan of action, but their best price. And that way they solve all of the issues that you may or may not even know exist, because they, after all, are the ones that are doing this work from day to day.
Thank you, Troy. All right, we're only 3 minutes from the end here of the meeting. So what I would recommend is, with no other hands up or tents, Josh, would you like to make any final remarks?
I certainly would. First and foremost, I just want to appreciate everyone's time today, especially those who made the commitment to drive in. Some folks from a considerable distance away. I think this was another good discussion. Like the last time, I got 7 pages of notes, I think. And I also encourage you to come ready in 2 weeks to have a conversation about funding streams. Some of the questions we talked about today on how much money is really needed on a yearly, biennial basis, and also to start identifying potential funding sources. Sometime early next week, I might send out a short survey to all of you on some of those kind of questions, like, hey, where do you when we were asking questions this summer, we don't have a whole lot on like, where do you think that funding should come from? So send some priming type questions. And I encourage you to participate in that survey just so that we have a starting point, so to speak, next week. So other than that, again, I thank you all. And I have nothing else for the group. So.
Thank you.
Well.